My cousin claimed, I'm the perfect one. After turning our family against me. So I found her hidden arrest record and exposed it at our family reunion. So, imagine this, you're 19, you've just lost your dad, the only person who really got you, and you're at his funeral in Charleston, South Carolina, surrounded by family. The kind of family that hugs you just long enough to make you feel they're there for you, but then steps back to swap gossip when they think you're out of earshot. I knew exactly what they were saying, poor Arya, only 19 and already an orphan, practically. And of course, there's Callista. My cousin, my mom's sister's daughter, and practically the family's crown jewel. Callista didn't waste a second. She sailed in wearing some fancy black designer dress, clutching mom's hand with this look of saintly sorrow. She was telling anyone who would listen how heartbroken she was, that she was so close to my dad, just as devastated as we were. I was the only one who saw through it. The whole thing was a performance. Callista hadn't even spoken to my dad in the last few years, she'd been too busy in Atlanta, bouncing from internship to job to another job, climbing her precious ladder of success. But everyone ate it up. They always did. Callista could charm a snake. After the funeral, I stayed home for a few days with Mom. Things between us were tense, but I chalked it up to grief. She barely spoke, just sat there clutching an old photo of Dad, muttering, "What will we do now, Arya?" Over and over. I didn't have answers, I was as lost as she was. A few days later, Mom broke the silence. "You know, you could be more like Callista," she said, almost absent-mindedly, as if it were a compliment. "She's going places. And with your dad gone." She trailed off. I felt like I'd been punched. Here I was, doing everything I could to hold it together, and all she could think about was how I didn't measure up to Callista. Callista, the golden girl who never seemed to have a problem in her life. I pushed it down, though. I was used to being second to Callista. I'd accepted it years ago. Besides, I had my own plans. College was my shot at building something for myself. I didn't need their approval. At least, that's what I told myself. Fast forward 2 years. I was in my sophomore year of college in Charleston, and for the first time, I felt like I was stepping out of the family shadow. I joined a writing program, made friends who actually liked me for who I was, and was working hard toward a degree. For once, I was proud of myself. I thought maybe Mom would be proud too, if she ever actually came to visit. And then, one summer, Callista invited the whole family over for a big barbecue at Aunt Gertie's house. It was one of those get-togethers where every single relative within driving distance was invited. Mom insisted I go, she wanted us to reconnect. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived, Callista was there in her designer sundress, making the rounds with her usual grace. She had just been promoted at her job in Atlanta, and every time someone asked about it, she launched into a rehearsed monologue about how blessed she felt to be so successful. She'd smile that perfectly charming smile, touch her pearls, and act like she'd pulled herself up from the depths of despair. At some point, I went inside to refill my drink, and that's when I heard it. Callista's voice, low and conspiratorial, drifting from the kitchen. "Poor Arya," she was saying. "She's having such a hard time at college. You know she actually got caught cheating on an exam? They had to put her on probation." I stopped dead in my tracks, clutching my drink. Cheating? Probation? I'd never done anything like that. My face burned with anger, but I felt frozen in place. She was spinning this lie so easily, so casually, like she was talking about the weather. "Oh, bless her heart," my Aunt Beth murmured, "and Rosie, poor Rosie, having to go through that after everything." I didn't hear the rest. I turned and practically stumbled back outside, my mind reeling. How could Callista say that? And the worst part, everyone believed her, without even questioning it. They just assumed it was true because perfect Callista said so. My whole family would rather believe a lie about me than see her as anything but perfect. At that point, I couldn't stay silent. I marched over to where Callista was sitting with a few other relatives and said, my voice trembling, "What are you telling everyone, Callista?" Her eyes went wide with mock surprise. "Arya. I didn't know you were there." "Yeah, I'm here," I said. "And I heard what you said. I didn't cheat on anything. Why are you lying about me?" She let out a soft sigh, her face shifting into an expression of patronizing concern. "I'm not lying, Arya. I heard things, that's all. And I wanted to make sure our family was aware. You know, so we can support you." "Support me?" I repeated, incredulous. "By spreading lies?" The relatives around us were staring now, whispering to each other. Callista leaned in, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Look, it's not my fault if people talk. Maybe if you actually did something with your life, people wouldn't have to wonder what's wrong with you." I could feel my fists clenching, but I didn't trust myself to speak. She was right in one sense, I'd always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background. And now, she'd used that against me, twisted my silence into guilt, made my shyness into shame. That night, I called Mom, thinking maybe she'd stand by me. But when I told her what had happened, there was a long silence. Finally, She sighed. Arya, maybe Callista's just concerned. She's always been close to the family. Maybe she sees something in you that you're not willing to admit. What? I said, my voice cracking. Mom, you can't actually believe her. Oh, honey, I don't know what to believe anymore, she replied, sounding tired. You've always been sensitive. I just think it's time to grow up and focus. Get serious. Be more like Callista. And just like that, my own mother confirmed what I'd feared for years. Callista would always be the daughter she'd wanted. Not me. I hung up and didn't talk to her again for months. Over the next few years, I buried myself in my studies, refusing to let Callista's lie define me. But no matter what I did, my family stayed distant. I'd send Mom updates on my grades, my accomplishments, and all I'd get back were short, polite replies. Aunt Gertie never called anymore, and my cousins stopped inviting me to family events. By the time I graduated, I'd resigned myself to the fact that I was on my own. Callista had destroyed my reputation with a few choice words, and the people I'd thought would always stand by me had turned their backs without a second thought. The pain was a constant, dull ache, but I learned to live with it. I moved to New York, found a job in publishing, and started building a new life. Slowly, the bitterness faded, replaced by a quiet determination. I didn't need them. But then, out of the blue, I got a call from Aunt Gertie. Her voice was shaky, as though she'd been crying. Arya, sweetheart, she began. It's about Callista. I think you should come down for the family reunion. Why? I replied coldly. I wasn't ready to forgive and forget just because they'd finally decided to call me. Aunt Gertie paused, then said, there's something we need to talk about. Callista's. Well, she's been in trouble. Serious trouble. When I arrived in Charleston, the tension was thick. Callista wasn't there yet, but everyone else was. My mom looked older, her face lined with worry. She approached me, her eyes searching mine. I'm glad you came, Arya, she said quietly. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Why am I here, Mom? Before she could answer, Aunt Gertie cleared her throat and addressed the room. I think it's time we talked about Callista. She's been hiding things from us. From all of us. It turned out that perfect Callista had a hidden life none of us knew about. She'd been arrested, multiple times, for fraud. She'd conned people out of thousands of dollars, forged documents, even stolen identities. She was under investigation in 3 states. As Aunt Gertie spoke, the room was silent. Everyone just stared at her, processing the words. Callista, the perfect one, the golden girl, the one everyone believed, had been hiding a double life of crime. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. I could see everyone struggling to connect the person they'd adored with this new, darker version. Aunt Gertie's hands were shaking as she went on, eyes downcast. We wanted to protect her, to protect the family, Aunt Gertie murmured. But she's gone too far. She's facing serious prison time now, and there's no escaping it. I sat there, letting it all sink in. The years of lies, of my family looking at me with disappointment because of her. All those wasted years when my mother wouldn't even speak to me properly because I wasn't good enough. Callista had played the part so well, keeping up appearances even as she built her secret life. Mom turned to me, her eyes wet with shame.
Arya, I don't know what to say.
I had no idea. I could see the cracks forming in my mother's armor of blind loyalty. I knew she wanted me to say something forgiving, to be the bigger person. To somehow comfort her, even though she'd never done the same for me. But I wasn't here to offer comfort. Not anymore. After a long silence, I finally spoke. So, now that the truth is out, what are you all going to do about it? I looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Because when I tried to defend myself, none of you believed me. You didn't even ask if what she said was true. I could see the guilt etched on their faces, but none of them spoke. They couldn't, because they knew it was true. Callista had spun a story about me, and they'd swallowed it whole. My voice shook with barely controlled anger as I continued. You all let her walk all over me, ruin my reputation, turn my own mother against me. And now you want me to come back here and just forget all of it? Just because now you've seen who she really is? Aunt Gertie started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. No, I'm not done. All these years, I was the one who had to rebuild my life from scratch, because the family I thought loved me decided I wasn't worth believing. And Callista? She got away with everything. Just then, the front door opened, and everyone turned. There was Callista, looking tired but still impeccably put together in some designer dress, holding a large leather bag in one hand. She paused in the doorway, looking around the room with a calm, calculating expression. Hey, everyone, she said, flashing that same charming smile that had fooled everyone for years. What's this? Some kind of intervention? Aunt Gertie's face hardened. Callista, sit down. We need to talk. Callista laughed, that cold, dismissive laugh she always had. What, now everyone's upset with me? Look, I know things got a little complicated, but it's nothing I can't fix. I stood up, feeling years of anger boiling to the surface. Complicated? Complicated? I said, my voice cold. You didn't just complicate things, Callista. You destroyed lives. You hurt people, and now, finally, it's catching up with you. She raised an eyebrow, a glint of amusement in her eyes. Arya, don't get all high and mighty on me. You're just jealous. You always have been. Jealous? I laughed bitterly. You tried to ruin me, Callista. And for what? Just so you could keep being the family's golden child? Guess what? They all know now. They know exactly who you really are. Her face paled slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Fine. So they know. But you really think I'll go down that easily? I've gotten out of worse situations. Not this time, I said. You're not getting out of this. With that, I pulled out a small, neatly printed stack of documents from my bag. You see, after years of being blamed and lied about, I started digging. I found records of every single fraud you committed. Every stolen identity, every forgery. I even found the warrants out for your arrest. I saw the flicker of panic cross her face. It was subtle, but it was there. For the first time in her life, Callista was actually cornered. Oh, and just so you know, I continued, smiling coldly, I've already shared these with the police. They're waiting outside. All it took was one call, telling them where they could find you. The room fell silent, a heavy, stunned silence as my words sank in. Callista's face contorted with rage. You set me up? She hissed. I shrugged. You set yourself up. I just provided the evidence. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support. Aunt Gertie, Mom, you're not going to let her do this to me, are you? I'm your daughter. But there was no support for her now. My mother, Aunt Gertie, even the cousins who had always adored her, all looked away, their faces filled with shame and anger. Finally, Aunt Gertie spoke, her voice cold and unrecognizable. Callista, I don't even know who you are anymore. Outside, we heard the sound of car doors slamming and heavy footsteps on the porch. Callista's eyes widened, her confidence slipping away. No, you can't do this to me. I'm the one who's supposed to be successful. You're nothing, Arya. You're just some. Miss Callista? A stern voice came from behind her. A police officer had entered, and behind him, two more stood in the doorway. Callista tried to run, but the officers blocked her path. She twisted, shooting me a look filled with pure hatred. This isn't over, Arya, she spat. I'll make sure you regret this. Every single one of you will regret this. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. Maybe I would have believed that once. But I don't anymore. The officers cuffed her wrists, reading her rights as they led her out the door. She fought them, still cursing, still blaming everyone but herself. Her perfect life, her perfect image, her carefully constructed facade, it was all crumbling around her. As she disappeared down the porch steps, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, one that had been there for years. I looked around the room at my family, seeing them through new eyes. They were ashamed, broken, and finally, they understood the cost of their blind loyalty. Mom approached me, her face etched with guilt and sadness.
Arya, I don't know how I could ever make it up to you.
I was wrong. So wrong. I took a deep breath. I don't need apologies anymore, Mom. I just needed the truth. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Will you ever be able to forgive us? I looked at her, then around the room at the family who had turned their backs on me so easily. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to start over. But I knew that the scars Callista had left on me wouldn't heal overnight. Maybe someday, I said finally. But right now, I need to live my life without any of you deciding who I am. I turned and walked out of Aunt Gertie's house, leaving behind the whispers, the apologies, and the shame that no longer belonged to me. For the first time in years, I felt free. As I stepped outside, I watched the police car pull away with Callista in the back seat, her face twisted in fury and defeat. She would never get to play the perfect cousin again. That life was over for her. And as for me? I was finally free to start living my own life on my own terms. And I was damn sure I'd never look back.